Welcome to Beyond the Surface. We highlight unique voices in architecture and design. We focus on stories from designers to uncover who they are beyond the surface. Hi, I'm your host, Alex Sanchez, representing our Beyond the Surface team. Today's episode is called Authentically You with our guest, Pascale Sablan. Pascale Sablan is CEO of Adjaye Associates New York studio, overseeing projects in North and South America and the Caribbean. She is the 315th living African American woman registered architect in the United States, embodying excellence, innovation, and sustainability throughout her portfolio of work. An active voice in the industry, she served as the president of the National Organization of Minority Architects, was awarded 2021 AIA Whitney M Jr. Award for her advocacy efforts, and is a member of the American Institute of Architects College of Fellows, where she is the youngest African American to receive this honor in its history. Pascale holds a Bachelor of Architecture from Pratt Institute and a Master's of Science in Advanced Architectural Design from Columbia University. Well, it is great having you on this podcast. I'm very excited for this conversation. My first time ever hearing you speak was at the AIA conference here in Chicago, and I was still a student at the time. I think the name of your speech was I Took a Stand.
I was asked to stand.
I was asked to stand, yes. And I think that changed the way I saw the industry and also just made everything feel a lot more relatable to what I was experiencing, especially as a first generation college student. So ever since then, you have been a big inspiration for me. So thank you for being on this podcast. How are you feeling today?
Good. Thank you so much for your generous words. I appreciate it. It's important to know, like, just a person sharing their story, how much it can resonate with other people. So I appreciate what you guys are all doing with this podcast, and I'm excited to contribute.
We're excited to have you here. So let's get this conversation started. So, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you became interested in architecture?
Sure. I'm originally from New York, and I have always been a creative kid, drawing, and just having a good time kind of using my creativity as part of like my hobby and such. When I was about 11, I was commissioned to do a mural at the Palmanac Community Center. And as I was drawing my jungle gym with this multicultural community, a person walked by and said, "Wow, you could draw straight lines without a ruler. That's a cool skill for an architect to have." And I acknowledge that this man was having this out loud thought. I don't think he was even really talking to me, but it was the first time that architecture was offered as something to consider. So since then, anytime ever somebody ever asked me what I want to be, architect was always the answer. So I knew very early on, like my trajectory and how I wanted to change the world. And when I got to high school and started to apply for colleges and started looking at universities and schools that are known for and have the expertise and frankly has the B arch for architecture, my mom was like, wait, let's just make sure that we know what we're getting ourselves into, because she wanted me to go to a larger university that had a bachelor's of science in architecture so that in case I changed my mind, I didn't have to change schools, I would just change majors. And for me, I really wanted to be in a place where I was learning from the best and I could be the best architect from the education. So she did sign me up for What's an Architect seminar at One Penn Plaza, which is in the city. That was back in the day when we first got Metro cards. We were using tokens before, so you had to learn how to like flick your wrist and stuff. And Wednesdays after school, I would go up to this building, sign in, and be in a conference room where I was the only girl. And my mom came with me the first time because, Caribbean parents. She was with me the first time and she was like, "You see?" And I was like, "Yeah, but I'm here." Right. And this was such a great program. They took us to architecture firms, model shops, newly constructed projects, projects in construction. And so it was a really great way of getting a true insight about what an architect does. And that just made my decision to pursue a degree in architecture that much more steadfast. But it also gave me the confidence to know that this very long, grueling education was going to get me to where I ultimately wanted to be. So that was a really important part for me. And as you mentioned, the I was asked to stand moment is first year of architecture schools, really hyped and excited to get started. And professors were all kind of giving the same speech. Architecture is really hard. Look to your left, look to your right. That person won't be around. But this architecture history professor was like, "Oh, you and you stand up." So me and this other classmate stood up and he said, "Okay, these two will never become architects because they're Black and because they're women." And I was surprised that a professor who didn't know my name nor my capacity, and to be fair, at the moment, I didn't even know my own capacity in the profession, would make such a strong proclamation. But it also helped me understand that when I show up, I was representing more than myself, right? That I had to show up and show out. And my performance couldn't be the reason why opportunities were removed. It had to be the ones that made them multiply. So whether I was feeling sick, it was like, no, 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 I can't be, the black girl that doesn't go to class. So persevere and thug it out. So I say all that to say I was blessed with purpose or privileged with purpose really early on to know not only did I want to be an architect and change the world, but I also knew that I wanted to be an advocate that changed the profession as well. And that led me into a lot of my advocacy work, volunteering with NOMA, with AIA, starting my nonprofit Beyond the Built Environment back in 2018, doing a series of exhibitions, publishing a book. All of these things are working towards the mission of making the profession and the built world more equitable and just.
I remember when I first listened to your I would ask to take a stand. I was very shocked that someone would do that in front of everybody. Like you said, he didn't know you, he didn't know what your capabilities were. It was just an assumption based off of history, prejudice. Uh,
Also, his lack of awareness. I think that
exactly.
was his lived experience. He wasn't saying it to be mean. He was saying it because he had not seen it. It was not something that he had experienced. And so that's why it was really important for me to find my tribe in NOMA, which allowed me to be around 4,000 other minority architects. That's why it was important for me to do the advocacy work of elevating our work and identity because we're so hidden.
Yes, exactly. I do want to take a step back. Can you talk a little bit about your family influences?
Sure. My parents are both immigrants. So I'm also first generation. My mom came here since she was in high school, so she used to it. She used to the vibes. My dad came after he became a doctor, so he grew up and started his professional career in Haiti. And there's just a lot of stigmas around that. And I noticed that our community where I grew up is an area called Cambria Heights in Queens, and it's predominantly Black neighborhood. I would say at the time, 90% Haitian. So I was able to hold my identity culturally and speak Creole and, go down the block and find a Haitian restaurant. I was able to live in my full experience without feeling any sort of way about it. I then went to an all-girls Catholic preparatory high school in Queens called the Mary Louis Academy. And it was another institution where it's a beautiful school. It reminded me of Harry Potter, like it was just gorgeous Gothic architecture. The library, mwah, like to die for, was like just a gorgeous, gorgeous school. And the accolades and the women that come out of the school are the top of the game. So I was really excited and honored to go to Mary Louis as well. And I learned about all these incredible women and how I was going to change the world because I was a woman. So imagine how very different it was culturally to go from a space where it was cool to be an immigrant. It was cool to learn and know new different languages. It was cool to eat your cultural and wear your cultural clothing and traditions. To be heralded for being a woman and telling you that the sky's the limit and that this is the place that will help you build your network and your resources moving forward. To being told immediately, yeah, you're not good enough for two things that are inherently things that I can't control, right? And so that background is a lot. I have 9 siblings. There's 10 of us total. We're all, very different. I'm second oldest. So I'm a bit more strict. I'm a rule follower, but also really playful because I want to connect with, all my siblings. And I'll say that playfulness has carried through. I'm more or less always with a smile on my face, being silly about something. But when I need to get serious and stern, I'm still from Queens. I can still go there. So that's been really helpful. And the other thing that I'll say is that I've been blessed and fortunate to have like really close relationship and ties and bonds with my family. My parents divorced when I was really young, and they both remarried. So I have two sets of amazing parents who love me and pour into me. I have siblings that, were products of all these relationships and dynamics, and both of us or all of them never asked us to call each other step or half. This is your brother, this is your sister. Sometimes my siblings from one relationship would come with me on a family vacation with the other and kept all the adult drama with the adults and just let the kids be together. And that was also really powerful. And I didn't realize how different and unique that was till I got much older. And then the other big pillar of my upbringing is my faith. I'm a Roman Catholic. My name is Pascale because I was born on Palm Sunday. So my mom wanted to call me Palma. My dad wanted to call me Pascal after the Paschal Mysteries or Paschal Candle. I very much grew up in my church, Sacred Heart, in Cambria Heights. There I was the first female sacristan. I like hung out there, I worked, and that was like where my teen club is. And so very much rooted my identity and my faith in the way that I move through this world. and really proud to carry all of that with me through my professional career. And even in this moment, as my curls are still wet, wearing my hair natural and, being authentically myself and not feeling that I need to subscribe to a particular vision or illustration of professionalism, but just me being naturally me and who I am is something that I really hold dear to so that I can love myself and then emulate that or stimulate that kind of thinking with people who come in contact with me.
I feel like you had a really strong community and a family behind you, always pushing you forward. It really became part of your identity. So I understand how like that interaction with that professor, to have had years of built up confidence in yourself and who you are, you're entering a new world, very little people who look like you, and then to be told that you won't be able to do anything. I can relate a little bit because I grew up in a mainly I'm mixed, Mexican and Caribbean actually. And so with my family, I also was like always surrounded by so many people who tried to push me forward. There were some people who still doubted me, but I still had this large community that pushed me forward. And I feel like this is gonna lead into our next conversation. Entering college, I feel like I started to question a little bit of my identity because those doubts do come in when you're not surrounded by too many people who look like you. So, could you actually talk about how you began to regain confidence throughout college and what your experience was like in university?
So I feel like in that moment when the professor made his proclamation, and I was really frustrated about a few things. A, the professor, right, for just speaking out his neck, but then also just the quietness of the class, right? I was surrounded by a lot of people who accepted that as fact and didn't say anything. It felt viscerally wrong to me, but what made it isolating is that it looked like it was just viscerally wrong to me, and it felt like correct for everyone else. And when I sat down, the student to my left, I won't forget him, Simon C. He said in more colorful terms, but ultimately it was like, prove him wrong. Do not let that be the thing that stops you. And as a very competitive person, that's what I needed to hear. And when I shared my experience with my parents, my mom was like, this is what I was worried about, right? This is why I was worried about you entering in this profession. So even air quote, we'll say the doubters, it wasn't about doubting, it was about protecting. And so being and understanding that, then the first thing I did after class is found the other girl he made stand up. And I was like, okay, there's 60 of us in this class, and there's two of us that apparently fit this profile. So we got to lock in and we got to help each other. So that moment made me reach for support and to support someone else who was potentially feeling the same things I was feeling. And we locked in and we helped each other through the whole 5 years. And we graduated with great projects and accolades. And like the best part of it is she actually ended up marrying my brother. And now they have two kids and they live in Florida. So it was like, homie said what he needed to say to give me a sense of purpose. And that's why I call it a privilege. And it needed to come to me in a way that shook my core and made me feel isolated so that I knew I had to find people who can support and understand what I'm going through. And I truly wish I had a NOMA chapter, a NOMAS chapter at Pratt at the time where I could have felt that. But the whole education process, it was me and Molly locking it down. And then upon graduation, my mom was like, yo, you have to get a master's degree. I was like, I don't need a master's degree. I already got a BArch. I'm good. I could take my license exam. And she was like, no, you are entering into a white man's profession. You need to make sure that you have all your paperwork in place so that nobody plays with you later. You're cute and you're cheap now coming out of school. But in a few years, there's going to be promotions, people are going to be passing you, and you don't want your graduate degree to be the reason why you're held back. So immediately upon graduating, and when I say immediately, I mean, I graduated the last week of May, and then I started my master's program the first week of June. So I moved from Pratt into Columbia to their AAD program. And you are looking at the only Black person in their entire school of architecture. So I was even more isolated as it relates to it. And I really felt isolation and that discomfort and was again needing to share my lived experience and make my community in those spaces. And so I think when we talk about like success, it came at a cost. Like this was not like a beautiful rainbow paved road. I tripped, I fell, I scraped my knees, I chipped some teeth along the way. Like there is a lot of crying, a lot of frustrations that occur, but like having my family, having my faith are not just things that shaped me growing up. It's what continues to shape me every day. It's what I lean into right now. And it's what I'm teaching my kid, right? Like, he asked me, what about Santa Claus? And so I was like, do you really want to know? And I said, once I tell you this, I can't untell you. He was like, tell it to me. So I talked to him about Jesus and his birthday. Like, and I went through all of that. And every day we read the Bible together. And it's important that I empower him with faith. And he observes me calling my mom daily, and he observes us spending time with my family to know that this is your first, your baseline, your home base that will protect you no matter what. And all the people that's going to applaud you, throw petals at your feet, love you when it's convenient. When things get tough, a lot of people walk away. But who will lock in and be there for you always? God. After that, family. So these are the two things that I can offer him and tell him and show him that I myself lean into is what honestly helps keep me going. And I think the successes that I'm experiencing is because I feel like I've tapped into what God has put me on this earth to do, and I'm doing his work in a way that's making him proud, and he's allowing me to continue to do that work in this way.
I know I'm just one person who has like also been like inspired by the work that you do, but once you finished school and graduated, what did your early career look like?
Great question. So, after finished my 5 years and then jumping right into my 3 semester master's program. So, I graduated in Pratt in '06 and then graduated from Columbia in '07. And it was a really great and powerful experience kind of going to the two schools because they're both New York-based schools. The professors are pretty much the same, but the resources and the mindset was very different. I often claim that Pratt is where I learned how to be an architect. And Columbia is where I learned how to be an advocate, right? Like, so Pratt was really about understanding how to develop a concept, how to like inspire my mind to develop new ideas. What's the statement I'm trying to make with my project, and how to be rigorous about applying that concept at every scale of the projects and of the different challenges that we have there. And even when I took that and I applied it at Columbia, they're like, great, that's your concept. That's how you applied it. But how do you know that's the best concept for this project, right? So I had to learn how to defend in a way that I did not at Columbia, at Pratt, excuse me. And that was really helpful to just understanding how to like articulate. And I refused to use like the fancy architectural terms. I always wanted my language to say very accessible. It felt very pompous, right? When we're like party and Noli, I'm like, yeah, 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 a plan and a section, right? And then, you look at it, what you're seeing. Like, I really wanted to keep the language authentic to me in the way that I was like navigating those spaces. Between the two, though, having classmates that graduated at Pratt a year before I was graduating from Columbia, that meant a lot of my classmates was already in firms and working. And so it really helped that I started a LinkedIn page and was connected to all my classmates who were graduating. Because then when I made my list of firms that I wanted to work for, I would run the LinkedIn search and see who in my network was actually there, and then tapped them and said, hey, would you mind recommending me or referring me? Which was always like a really great thing because they also sometimes, if I got it, would get a stipend for the referral. So it was such a game changer from sending cold emails like, hey, to whomever it may concern, to somebody saying, hey, this is my classmate. The way she handled herself at school, I know she would be a great addition to our practice, was really the secret sauce that I didn't know I had that I leveraged. And through those referrals, got my very first job. Now, my interview joke, because I like to make people smile. And my interview joke, my graduation day, I want to say was May 17th. And so during like interviews, they would say, oh, when can you start? I was like, well, I graduate May 17th, so I can start May 18th. Ha 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 ha. Funny. And then usually it's like, okay, yeah, we'll start you in June or whatever. I'm like, sure, sounds good. This one job was like, okay, when can you start? I was like, I graduate 17th. I can start the 18th. It was like, okay, 18th it is. And I was like, wait, what? And then they were giving me a tour and they said, oh, wait, is the 18th a Monday? I was, it's a Thursday. Should I just wait for the following Monday? They're like, no, Thursday's fine. And that was the dream firm that I wanted to work at. And so I remember being at graduation angry. And my mom was like, what's wrong? And I was like, I gotta go to work tomorrow. I gotta be an adult starting tomorrow. And she looked at me with such disappointment. She was like, fix your face. Do you know how many people are standing here who don't have a job? Not only do you have a job tomorrow, you have your dream job tomorrow. Not only you're starting tomorrow, you're starting early tomorrow, and you thinking and praying, Jesus, that you got this opportunity. So a good thing about families, they always like, keep you in line. But anywho, I say all that to say, she was right, but I was tired, y'all. I went straight from 5 year bachelor's to the master's and then straight into work. It was powerful because I was hired in the international studio, which means I got to work on projects all over the world, as long as it wasn't in the US. So I got to touch so many different typologies: office, residential, cultural projects, transportation, master plan. Like my portfolio in my early career was just incredibly diverse because of the exposure I had in this really cool international studio. And because it was international, there was embedded a value of understanding cultures and identities and sensitivities that again allowed me to be very much myself while working there and getting to know and understand other cultures. I mean, we worked really, really hard, but I think we like really churned out some dynamic and amazing projects. And in that practice, they really celebrated advocacy work. They really pushed for people to be involved. They supported me becoming a lead accredited professional. They helped me with my licensing exams and all the resources. They, helped with my NOMA membership and AIA membership. And when I became leadership and a board member of the New York chapter of NOMA, they let me host board meetings there and resources. So it was a really great stepping into the profession and seeing how a firm can support beyond the projects, but how we could talk about impacting on a professional level. And I was there for 11 years. And honestly, what changed is I got pregnant and I had my son, and the dynamics and the infrastructure just wasn't the same. And it was the first time ever that I doubted my ability to be an architect, because I want to be an extraordinary architect, but I want to be a fantastic mom at the same time. And it felt like it was in a very big conflict there. And luckily, I learned that it wasn't the profession that wasn't a right fit. It just, the firm itself would no longer fit for the lifestyle that I had.
Well, first, I do want to say working at the firm, that's such a unique experience being able to get so much exposure to different cultures outside the US. I think it's a very interesting experience, especially given that your parents were also immigrants. So also being able to work on things that are not in the US is just getting in other people's shoes, really understanding other people's culture, their language, what architecture means to them. And so really being able to understand different people and see what architecture can do to change their lives. I really like a lot of things you were saying, especially they were able to really support you and push you forward in your career. And like, again, it was part of that confidence that you were talking about, like understanding where you stand, but also being secure in yourself. And I understand that also being a mother is a big shift in your life. So can you talk a little bit about being a mother while also being an architect?
Initially, having X was like, it changed my body, right? And I mean that in the sense of like, I feel like I wasn't as sharp. Like my body was willing, but my mind was just like not there. And I felt a lot of shame and not feeling like I could just pick up where I left off pre like maternity leave. And that like really meant that tasks were taking me longer. And because I was out for a few months, and I always talk about how Xavier was 3 weeks late. He stayed up in there. And so I wasted a 1 month of maternity leave with no baby in hand. And so I went back to work urgently without truly healing properly. Like, right. So my body was still very much only 2 months out of having Xavier. And I was just struggling for the infrastructure in the firm. So having a dedicated place for me to pump was like a challenge, and it was a conference room. And if somebody was having a meeting in that conference room and their meeting ran long, then like I was in immense pain, and a lot of times would ooze through my shirts. So I would have to have extra clothes in the office in case I had milk accidents. And again, it just felt a level of like shame, like, oh, I smell like milk now. Like it just was a lot to kind of navigate. And my manager at the time kept saying I take a lot of breaks. And I was like, my guy, nothing about pumping is a break, right? Like, but it was for him, I wasn't at my computer proper. But for me, I was doing these painful processes throughout the day to sustain the life of my kid. And it was just like a big conflict there. And it was really difficult in that way. And so I was really happy to find another firm. And I gave myself a deadline of when I would leave. And I was like, whatever, I'm gonna apply to all these firms, and whoever gives me a job, I'll pick from there. And that's where I'm going. I can't do this much longer. I felt my breaking point coming. And so I applied to a few firms and really got some amazing offers. And my number one question was like, well, how do you accommodate parenthood? Like, right? And some were like, oh, because of who you are, we would give you your own space and your own time to do this. make sure that you're good. As impressive as those firms were, it felt like they were making an exception to the rule for me. And I worried, like, well, what if you leave? What if my colleagues start to resent me for having special privileges that nobody else has? And there was one firm with a straight face was like, we don't care if you got two kids, no kids, a cat, a dog, it doesn't matter. Our hours are from 9 to 6. Everybody's here at 9, everybody leaves at 6. When you're here, you're locked in. After that, when you're home, you're locked in home. We want everybody to have a full life. And what was powerful is the way they set up the business to support that infrastructure is that at most architecture firms, you make a salary. So if you put 40 hours, if you put 50 hours, if you put 60 hours, it doesn't matter. You're getting the same salary. But when it comes to how the hours hit the job, only 40 hours hit the job, which incentivizes managers to staff projects very minimally. And then when there's deadlines, kind of ask team members to work crazy hours over the weekends, late at night, because any hour after 6 was essentially free. You're donating it to the project and to the company. At this company, to ensure project managers were aware of everybody's hours, every hour you put to the job hit the job. So whether you worked at 6 in the morning, at 6 at night, it was hitting the project. So project managers would be like, hey, why are you still here? Why are you still here? And I'm like, oh, that diagram's taking me longer. They're like, you know what, for this submission, we don't need that diagram. Or, okay, give this diagram another 2 more hours and then like let it go. Or actually, this person is actually really great at that diagram. Let me tap him, see if we can help expedite it. But it was collectively everybody's challenge of making sure we get things done in the estimated time that our fees were based off of. And so it was the first time that I got exposed to the infrastructure of the business supporting a mission or value alignment that they keep saying is part of the culture of the firm. So that was like incredible because I had never seen or experienced anything like that. I was now going home at regular hours. It was incredible. However, they did not care about advocacy at all. And as a matter of fact, when I became elected president of NOMA on the national level, it was a problem. I got called into the conference room and asked why my name was even on the ballot and that we needed to come up with a plan to make up for my time that I would serve as president. And I was like, I'm giving this company national access and people are seeing us. And they're like, yeah, but if that doesn't yield projects, then it doesn't really count. And I was like, well, that's technically not the point of advocacy, but it also has yielded us projects. It's like, yeah, that's one project. Do that 3, 4, 5 times, then that's different. So in my mind, during my 2 years of president-elect, I knew before I became president, I really needed to make sure that I found a place that would support me being the president and doing advocacy work in addition to being a parent. And so in late 2020, I got the call to join Adjaye Associates, and I was so honored and excited, but I was like, man, I wish I could. But I have a really small little one and I want to be an amazing mom. And then, David's response was like, most of, if not all of my leaders all have small children. And I said, okay, but it would have been great, but I just got elected president of NOMA. And he was like, yeah, yeah, I know. Which means you understand how to be a leader in the industry and you understand the responsibility of architecture beyond the projects. That's part of the reason I called. And it surprised me because things that I thought were negatives, right? And reasons that would disqualify me were reasons why I was considered and even seen as the best fit for the position and to join the team. And that level of confidence that is poured into you by your boss, that's like next level kind of armor. And that really gave me the authority to kind of come into a space and be like, hey, gotta go. It's trick-or-treating day, right? Or whatever it is, and participate in work in a way that I felt like I could hold my identity in that way. And I remember his question to me was like, what would make this your dream position? And I said, frankly, if I could be an architect and an advocate all at the same time. And he was like, done. And I don't know if he even understood the gravity of him saying done, like as if it was nothing. Because up until then, I was going to work from 9 to 6, and then I'd get home and I would do work for advocacy from 6 to 9. I was always up in the middle of the night working. I was doing work constantly. And this kind of goes into answering your question because you're like, girl, you took forever to answer this question, but here it is. My son drew a family picture and he drew him in the middle. He's holding his dad's hand in one side, and he's holding my hand in the other. And in my other hand is my laptop. And it was like the way he saw me, which was me who was might be physically present, but always doing something, right? And when me and my husband divorced, I really wanted to be intentional because it's just me and X, right? And I cannot have him feel like he's yanking me between me and my computer. So a few things I decided to do. One, not try to subdivide myself into sections and fractions because it doesn't work. I'm at all times an architect, an advocate, mom, curly haired person. It doesn't stop. So sometimes I'm showing up with all of those identities, half of those identities, some of those identities, but it's a possibility. And so I've set up my life where once I leave work, I am done for the day. When I'm in the office, I'm locked in. Ain't nobody messing with me. Like, this is what we're doing. But once I go home, it's home time. It's dinosaurs time. It's Pokemon Go time. It's creature scenario. It's Minecraft. It's dance party. That is what we're doing. We're eating dinner. We're doing our bath time, and we're both going to sleep at the same time, 9:30. You could try to text me after 9. You could do all you want, but my phone is on do not disturb. I am gone. However, I do wake up at 4, 4:30 in the morning, and that's when I do my praying, my journaling, my working out. And the alarm that I have that goes off is basically the time that tells me it's time to take my son to like get him ready for school, right? That felt the most sustainable, where I'm doing self-care as the beginning of my day, and I'm also protecting and preserving my family time. And so it's been really intentional that X not see me with my computer, right? Like even scheduling this recording, it was like, okay, let me sketch you up for a play date so that he's not like sitting in the corner on a beautiful Saturday waiting for me doing work, but he's in a place where he's having fun. And so being really intentional about what his lived experience is really, really important to me, but also finding a firm that understood that I'm a mom and helped me with that is incredible, and have leadership retreats all over the world and tell me bring Xavier, and X being able to like travel the world and see these places and sit in boardrooms and be in conferences, and he's able to like really experience all sides of me as well. So Xavier is a staple at our NOMA board meetings, quarterly board meetings. When I do lectures or keynotes, he's usually in the audience telling me I'm doing a good job. You know, he's right there with me in a way that doesn't conflict with his schooling. So that's also something that I'm really intentional about. And when I'm going to someplace super cool, I'm like, oh, my son has to come with me so we can accommodate him. So when I was able to keynote at Lego, I was like, I cannot come here without him. So we found like a day and a time that wouldn't conflict with school so that he can come. And they did a whole itinerary just for him as well. And so I think he sees and understands the importance of the work that I'm doing, and he hears my language as around it, and I can see how that's informed him too. So I say all that to say being a parent didn't deter me or distract me or even take away my pathway to what I'm calling my successes now. It's just been like another beautiful layer of consideration and another like cheering part person to help me on those tough days.
And I love that you talk about it because I feel like that's a big fear a lot of women have, especially like when entering any industry or just going into school, really understanding what your career might look like. I feel like I've talked to even some of my friends and they're like, oh, when I have kids, I might have to just be a stay-at-home mom. And it's just like, what are the options for us? Because, if we want to have a family, it's always, what do we do? And so I do like the way you're talking about it, like learning how to find the balance and not lose yourself in the process, but also care about your career and the goals you have, the advocacy, NOMA, and we'll talk about it in a bit. But I feel like it's not something that is seen a lot in the profession overall. And we have talked with other mothers, other parents too, and they do talk about it as well. I will say I do like the way that you explained that you found somewhere that supports everything that you do, full of young women who are also in their early stages of motherhood. You're able to be supporting them as well as just being a living example that it is possible for other women to do the same thing. And I just think that's just very inspiring.
I appreciate that because my very first NOMA board meeting, and I think I was tapped to be historian, was in 2016. And the agenda was going late, and it ended up being the time that I was supposed to run my report, ended up now aligning with my nursing time. So, my husband at the time walked in, handed me X, and I was literally nursing while reading my report. And he finished, I finished, we finished, and like, burped them and then gave them back to my husband at the time. And I didn't really think much of it. But to this day, people still come up to me like, yo, I'll never forget when you nursed your son at a board meeting. And I was like, oh, I could be a mom. And I was like, yeah, you could be a mom. And when I'm bringing X to conferences, he has way too many suits. He has suits that he wears, so he feels also confident in those spaces as well. One of my favorite stories recently is I got honored by NCARB with the Presidential Medal of Honor. And I was packing all my medals, my FAIA medal, my Whitney M. Young medal, and my NOMAC medal. And Xavier had won some medals in a like school race. So he had like a goal. He said, I'm going to bring my gold medal. All right. And so he wore, so he had his tux and he wore his medal. And everyone's like, oh, what's your medal about? And he was like, oh, 300-meter dash, right? And I appreciated that when he's in those spaces with me, he's like not off to the side or even shamed or shunned. Like the industry themselves, people come to him, talk to him. He don't stand me, he's networking his own self. Like I'd be like, where's Xavier? Xavier, come back, right? Like he just feels so comfortable in these spaces. So I say all that to say we might perceive that our kids like we have to keep it separate and they can't know, but in actuality like leading with that is really important. And I'm happy that I get to be an example of that because I know I hadn't seen it and I had read the statistics that I think Rosa Shang had put out with the missing 32% report that she does biannually, where she talks about a man and a woman can get engaged and his trajectory goes up and hers like drops. And then when they get married, the same happens. And then when they have kids, the same happens. So being a woman who's married, who has a child, is the rarest of rarest to become a partner or principal at a firm that you didn't start yourself. That is like the beyond color, beyond race, ethnicity. That's actually like unicorn status. So if I know that I'm a unicorn in this space, I'm gonna let the rainbow farts fly, right? Let people see it, let people like experience it, and just kind of understand that that's part of my identity and it's possible.
Yeah, like I have seen a few firm owners who are well, most of the time it's couples. Like it's not just a woman, right? So most of the time it is like a couple because it's pretty hard to do it alone. And I don't mean that in any bad way. I grew up with like a single mother too, so I understand what it is. You're right. You don't usually see people becoming the CEO, the owner of a company. You don't see people rising up to the top. Usually it's people who are founding the company, especially people of color. It's usually they have to be the ones founding it. And it's very impressive because you're also a big advocate, a big leader, a person that people look up to. And that is like where we're going to start to talk about in a second, because I love that you talk about how your son is already being inspired. If your son's being inspired, you have to know that millions of people are also being inspired because they're also all looking at you as well. And I feel like also a child is a reflection of their parents. And you understand that because you grew up with very strong parents, with people who loved you and always pushed you forward, and you want the best for your child. And I feel like you have shown that in the work that you do. It comes off in your character, in your speeches. I've been in the crowd seeing your son also cheering you on in the crowd. You always call him out. And I think that is very powerful because everybody in that crowd is looking at, I could be an advocate and run an entire firm while also being a parent, a mother, a licensed architect, everything. And that's just very inspiring. Can you talk more about some of the stuff you do for advocacy, both NOMA and also talking about the beyond the built environment?
Absolutely. I just make a small point of clarification. I'm not a firm owner. I'm just the CEO of
Okay.
the, is what I'm saying. Like usually firm ownership is where you usually find the diversity. And so even when I was being appointed to that high position, finding my network that can actually help give me advice and help explain what to do and how to be in that leadership was also something that was quite challenging. In terms of advocacy, I joined NICOBA, I want to say in 2009. That's the New York Coalition of Black Architects, which is the New York chapter of the National Organization of Minority Architects. And I joined the board and I functioned as both the recording secretary and the corresponding secretary. And that's when I kind of started getting exposure to Robert Rules of Order and like how to sit and be responsible on a board, and also got exposed to all these juggernauts in the field who were running practices and leading, and also up against other big agencies and leadership, and understanding the true infrastructure of what was and what are the challenges in the profession, and how to strategically think and strategize to best approach and to dismantle it. So it was really, really powerful to hold those positions of leadership. And then from there, I became the president of the New York chapter through a few years of volunteering. And after my first year, the position of regional vice president opened up. And the president at the time had recommended that I like strongly consider the position. And I said, I really want to. However, I just did 1 year of my presidency and I want to complete my term. So that's when we kind of leaned on like maybe I could be the historian instead, which gives me an introduction to the national board, but still allow me to be the president of the New York chapter in that position, all while having Xavier. And so that was also like really powerful and important to kind of see that transition. And then after that year, the person who had actually taken on the Northeast regional position couldn't stay in it. Like she had to change and I think move. So this position opened up anyway. So I got to be the regional vice president and oversee 8 local chapters of the Northeast, which was powerful. And then that really set me up to be president of NOMA. And now I'm the immediate past president, supporting Brian C. Lee Jr. in his presidency. I say all that to say I have been volunteering and being part of NOMA since 2009, and it catapulted my career. My very first yes in terms of public speaking was the 2014 NOMA conference. They were the first persons to hear that I had something unique to say and gave me the opportunity, place, and platform for me to do it. And it was maybe 20 people if I'm like counting and rounding up. But even after they stopped, it was like, okay, would you like some feedback? And I was like, I would love some feedback. And they're like, well, maybe you want to talk about this a little bit more. Or maybe you want to expand about that. Or this part was really good. And it was like this very safe space to learn how to do this new skill while feeling nurtured and mentored in that process. And I don't know who those 20 people were, but they were like the right 20 people because they told other members, other people who attended conference. It even got back to my boss at my firm that I did such a great job. And then my bosses at my firm was like, oh, we're going to put you on more business development interviews and meetings because apparently you are a really great public speaker. And so like when I say NOMA forged who I am today, I don't mean that lightly. I mean that sincerely with all like seriousness. With all the advocacy work that we're doing, there's a lot of dismantling of like oppressive structures. And it's daunting and it's heavy and it's a lot of hard, heavy work. And I said, but when do we celebrate? Like, when do we like cheer? And again, being a person who has so many siblings, my siblings know me to be the one to be like, oh, mom, did you know, Fiji got an A on her test? Or did you know Patrick did great on his report? Did you know Chris did this? Like, I'm usually the person hyping and telling and sharing the good news of my siblings because everybody's like, I don't know, conditioned to like be quiet about it. Don't even understand that. So I was like, oh, I think with what uniquely is my expertise or what makes me happy is celebrating other people. I'm going to start an organization that celebrates other people. So that's how the Say It Loud exhibition first started in 2017, where I elevated 22 diverse designers of New York. And then that started to take on. And every new Say It Loud exhibition I had, I elevated women and people of color of that location. I just had my 53rd Say It Loud exhibition, Say It Loud New Jersey, and continuing to create and curate these exhibitions all over the world. And I have elevated 1,142 people in this work. And that advocacy effort was like why I founded Beyond Built Environment, because it was basically the business arm that allows me to run all these exhibitions and the events that are adjacent to it. And that if anything went wrong, it was only going to like impact the LLC and not me. I later converted that organization into a nonprofit, which was really helpful. And in that content, in that work since 2020, I became kind of adamant about publishing a book that elevated the work and identities of people of color and women. And I got so many no's. I got no's from publishers that said nobody's going to care about a book like this in 2 years. I got some publishers that was like, oh, you have to remove white women from your book. And I said, no, that professor didn't ask me to stand because I was simply Black, else there would have been other people to stand. He said because I was Black and because I was a woman. And even though white women have different challenges than I do, they're still hitting this unnecessary oppressive wall that is yielding similar results, a lack of promotions, pay equity, work-life balance. So no, I need women, white women in my book. That killed some deals. Every time I do exhibition, I actually have the content on my library called the Great Diverse Designers Library, where you can see the profile pictures and even videos of every person that's ever been featured on this library. So some publishers was like, well, why would somebody buy a book when they can go on your website and see the information for free? So they required a paywall where I'd have to charge people to see the content. And I was like, you're missing the mission. The mission is to make this information as accessible as possible. So I can't make a paywall. That kills some deals. Other publishers wanted me to pay for the book outright. And I was like, I don't know if you know what architects make, but I don't have the pockets to fund a whole book. It's not the monograph of my company. This is me just acknowledging when I look at my shelves of all these architectural books, how many have women and people of color featured in them? And then lastly, I said, just like architecture, it's not just the end product, it's the process. So I would want everyone who touched the book to be a woman or a person of color, from my manager, copy editor, distributor, book designer needs to be a woman or person of color. That definitely killed a lot of deals. But I was really proud to find my partner in oral editions, and we were able to say yes to all the things and maintain that value alignment and be able to publish our book, which is Greatness, which I have right here. Really proud of it. And it took 5 years to come to fruition, but I had all the content. It was just a matter of finding the right relationship and partner to kind of make the project come to fruition. And it was really important to me that the book felt monumental and substantial. I wanted to be really colorful and vibrant, right? So I'm not afraid of color, and I wanted that to be representative of the book. I wanted to showcase people's faces, their names, their work. Each typology starts with an essay from me about how that typology can harm and its responsibility to heal, and making sure people like understood the healing power of architecture and then elevated the work and identity of women and people of color who use architecture to do just that. So like then you have like the collage page that has everyone's beautiful face and their names, and then you get to see some of their work within there. And so I'm really proud of the book because it does a really great job of having a good balance of gender, ethnicity, age, location. It's an international book. And it's unfortunate slash fortunate that it came out at the time where it was essentially immediately banned because in all intents and purposes, it is a DEI book that elevates women and people of color. So been having to be very strategic about how to get this book out there. Grateful of platforms that are allowing me opportunities to share my story, my mission, and the work that we're doing, and just really continuing to push the mission forward, even just not domestically, but also internationally.
I didn't know that the book was banned.
What I
Yeah.
mean by that is a lot of schools can't buy it, right? They can't put it on their curriculum anymore because people are worried about losing state funding, right? So it works if people donate, but they can't outright buy. They can't put it on the syllabus. They can't do any of that. And even when I go to speak at some schools, which I used to do a lot of public speaking, I'm now giving a list of words that I cannot say that includes women, DEI, sustainability, green. Like there's terms that I can't say, not because they don't fundamentally agree or value those words, but they've been threatened that if that is what is taught in their institution, that they would lose funding that would take away opportunities for students and faculty and so on and so forth. So we're all trying to navigate this new world order, but to do it in a way that doesn't stop us, but a way that we're able to be smart and strategic and careful, right? Because I don't want anything that I do to take away opportunities from others. I want to multiply them. So being really intentional there.
Yes. I feel like it still came out in a really good time though, because of everything going on. I feel like on the other side, people need to see this book. They need to know all this information, especially right now where there is such a big fight for the eye and there is such a big fight going on, especially for those going into college and anyone in the profession or the entire country as a whole is going through this entire process where this is a crucial time where we need to know that there are people who are creating books like this, like you, who are talking about these things. This is a time where advocacy is very important. I know a lot about the book. I haven't read it. It's been on my to buy list. I love reading, so I'm very excited. It's one of the books I do want to get. But I feel like it's also just very important book to have because there isn't many books that do have people of color in it as architects. I didn't know any architects, women of, or just people of color in general until I joined my local NOMA's chapter. That is when I first found out about any person of color that was in architecture that had any involvement in history whatsoever when it comes to architecture. And I feel like that the book is very important because it really teaches you that. It shows that we have been part of history for a very long time and that some stories have not been told that need to be told. And so now that like we're talking a bit more about architecture, can you talk about why advocacy matters in architecture?
Sure. I strongly believe that you can't be what you can't see. And it's important that we raise the visibility of women and people of color that have been contributing to society. I'm intentional about them being contemporary, currently practicing, which means when we talk about great architects and designers, it's not people that's been around and I mean been gone for generations and generations, but the people who are tangible, where that you can go on their social media page, you can visit their firm, you can actually get to know them and have access to that greatness is really important. But even in the architecture process itself, we are so rare. I make up 0.02% of the profession Black women do. And we need to make sure that people see that we're out here. So that's why I volunteer with Project Pipeline Camps, which is an amazing NOMA program. ACE mentoring. I was a mentor for many, many years. And so I try to find, participate, and support programs that help young people know about the profession and kind of get them started. But then, even when we're doing projects, prioritizing, heralding, and advocating for the community voice in the design process also lets them be part of the process, so much so that they have a level of ownership and they can participate in embedding their identity into the architecture and into the space planning, which is really important, which then yields architecture that is more equitable and just and less oppressive and part of the infrastructure of marginalizing communities. And so when we think about our clients, it's not just the person who cuts the check, it's everybody that's impacted by our work. And so how can we meaningfully engage them during the community process, and not just in the concept, but with every phase, like teaching people about what architecture is, keeping our language accessible so that when you're talking to them, they fully understand what you're saying. And if they don't, they feel empowered to be able to be like, wait, what does that mean exactly? And be able to have examples of that. And there's a level of accountability that also goes with architecture and including the community in the process to say, hey, here's what we heard. Here's how we've included it into the design. Here's what we heard and we haven't included it yet. People are still making decisions, or it's still early on. Or here are the things that we heard that we couldn't bring in, and here's why they couldn't be incorporated, right? And so this was a really important way of teaching community that them coming and participating doesn't mean they're going to get everything they asked for, but they'll be respected and be considered, and they'll learn something along the way, the same way that we are learning from them and engaging with them in community.
One of the things you said really stuck out to me. You can't become something you've never seen before. I've never thought about it like that, but that is very true. It matters if we want to be able to change the future of the profession, especially understanding that architecture is all about innovative. I feel like we need to be some of the inventors of the new things that are coming out, taking a hold of sustainability and understanding how to solve some of the issues that currently exist in the built environment. And I feel like part of that goes into bringing our identity into the design. So can you talk about how we can start to bring our identity into design? What does it mean to have a building designed by a person of color?
Sure. So again, for me, the question and the answer is not necessarily aesthetic, right? It's cultural. And making sure that that identity isn't a pattern or even a color palette, but it's even the way that we live, the way that we love, the way that we are in community, and having architecture kind of be the structure for that. So an example of that, for instance, is like when we talk about a home, right? We talk about the master bedroom. Whose master bedroom? Right? When we think about master, we're pulling that language and that history forward. So there's a difference of saying the primary bedroom and the secondary bedroom versus saying the master, right? And these are things that we have to acknowledge that some of the language that we're keeping also holding this really taught history within them. Embedding culture is a way of the process of how you engage with the community to participate in it so that you are not imposing what you think is a representation of the culture, but people as part of the community is able to speak to that, and you finding creative ways of kind of implementing that into the space. And so sometimes it could be the building technique, right? The way in which the construction type, the materials that you're selecting, that starts to speak to the history and the legacy and even the artistry of a particular group or a particular community, which is really powerful. Looking at existing architecture and understanding what was once there and why from a contextual and sustainability approach, and how that can help create more active and passive processes to make a more sustainable project. But one of my favorite examples of a project that I think embeds community and culture is the Sycamore and Oak project that our studio has done in DC. And in this particular project, it is a mass timber structure, so really pushing sustainability there. And getting approvals through the processes takes a long time. And so the client wanted to make sure that the site didn't stay boarded up this whole time and wanted to create an interim village that allows community to start using the space before the building even arrives. And so we were able to create, design, and build a temporary structure out of mass timber, which then allowed us to kind of go into the agency processes and understand their heart palpitations as it relates to us kind of exposing and expressing this new building material. It also had a series of community engagements to kind of hear what are the spaces that they needed. And a lot of it was like they didn't have a space for retail to like have their like stores, the storefronts. And so this interim village became an interim retail village where we created pockets of spaces for different businesses, local businesses. And in some cases, this is their first ever brick and mortar space for them to actually sell, or this is like them kind of reopening after their business didn't do well the first time. And then we were able to also offer classes that speaks to like how to run a business, making sure you have your supply chain regulated and making sure the performance working, and also training community to come be there and be patrons of those spaces. And then the other really dynamic part of it is because it was a small structure, we were able to hire a local minority owned a construction company who was able to work through the details, understood the supply chains, get all their subs, so that when the larger 650,000 square foot version of the project ultimately comes to fruition, they're actually in a really competitive position to bid and potentially get the project because of that knowledge and expertise. And so I say all that to say advocacy doesn't necessarily just needs to be programs or posters and protests, right? Advocacy can actually also be architecturalized and thinking about what the local community and the local groups use in terms of the material palette and embedding muralists who are local to create art on the structures, to create spaces that speaks to that is really, really important. And that to me is how you embed culture into the built environment, because it's not just a matter of putting like an Africa print on the wall. It's about like acknowledging how we function as a community and creating spaces that actually support and amplify that.
I feel like when bringing identity and design, it starts to create a space that feels like you're also welcome there. Like when you're talking about having people run the design construction process, it feels a little bit more welcoming. Like the people who are also being able to use the building, the people in the communities that it's being built, it feels like it belongs to them because there is a connection there, especially since the people who created the building are people who represent them. And I feel like that's part of what's been changing with architecture. A lot of the architecture over time, especially in the US, didn't always have the voices of the people who are creating it now. And I feel like when entering a building designed by people who represent the type of people that are in that community, it feels a lot different. Being able to see other people is a motivation in itself. I guess what I'm trying to say is the entire architecture environment begins to feel different when there is a lot of people of color working on a building.
Right? Just because a person is of color doesn't necessarily mean that they're designing for people of color or holding that process. It's the process itself that makes things more equitable. So I wouldn't presume that just because a person of color is working on a project that they're going to be culturally sensitive, because there's that famous sentence like not all, skin folk are kinfolk, right? It's not necessarily, but I think the more of us in the space, the better. And the more that we can prioritize community in our process that cuts across culture and identity, then the more opportunities for people to be empowered to participate in it. I do see power in the diversity. Like our office is 50% female and 82% BIPOC, and that's intentional. And that required us to really think about how we did our hiring and the questions that we were asking and where we were kind of pulling from and where we were extending those offers to. And so I think with me being there, it also signaled that it's a safe space for people that look like us to also apply, and that they would be considered through their talents and not be dismissed because of their race or ethnicity. But I guess I say all that to say I wouldn't presume just because a person's of color that when they're designing for people of color.
That is true. That being said, I know we are coming to a close with the podcast episode. So, could you give some advice for people about identity and confidence?
I'll tell you a quick story. I want to say it was during COVID times. I was watching a show called Blackish, and the main characters were about to have another child, and it was an episode about them coming up with a name for the kid. The mom, Rainbow, wanted to name the child something very conventional, let's say John or Matthew, like something along those lines. And the father wanted to name the child Devante. And I could hear the mom say things that I've said in the past, right? Where, no, we have to pick a name that would allow them to bypass any oppression or obstacles that when they see the name in an email that or in a letter that he would get a call back or they would get a call back, etc. But in that episode, they kind of pointed to like, why do we keep assimilating? Why do we keep purging our culture and our identities to bypass the oppressive infrastructure rather than just dismantling the oppression itself, right? And at the end of the episode, they landed at naming the kid Devante. And I acknowledged that like I always like loved my name, Pascale St. Louis or Pascale Sablan, because you read it and you didn't know what to expect, neither ethnicity and or gender. And I literally complimented my name for its ambiguity. And I understood after that episode how flawed that was, that your name literally is your identity. It's your culture, it's your legacy, it's your family legacy. And so that moment is when I changed my bio. And so the first sentence of my bio is Pascal Sablan, the 315th licensed African American female architect in the country. If there's anything about that first sentence you don't like, you don't need to keep reading. We don't need to be friends. Like I just owned it. And I also acknowledge the privilege of the time in which I was able to make that change, right? I was fully established in my profession. I understood that I was a mom at this point. I was delivering projects I was really proud of. And so I was in leadership position at NOMA. So it allowed me to hold that, but it was definitely an intentional shift of saying, no, I'm going to lead with who I am. And if that takes away opportunities, then those opportunities weren't for me in the first place. And so when I think about your question about how to lead with confidence towards successes, it's really about like finding your spaces that align the best with who you are and what you're striving to do and be, and finding your community in multiple places. It's not just the best firm, but it's also about all the kind of different committees and groups that you could be a part of. And it's also knowing that you're working towards a bigger mission beyond yourself, right? There's self-preservation and self-care, but there's also like how do you use your talents to help other people? We talked about me getting the AIA Whitney M Young Jr. Award in 2021. That award came to me because I elevate other people. So elevating other people doesn't take away from a person. It actually makes us all shine even brighter. And that's something that is really important, that we need to not live and work in a mindset of scarcity, that like there's only one opportunity. And if somebody takes that opportunity, then there's no opportunities for me, where we're stingy with our resources and we're stingy with our expertise. And instead being a mindful of like mind of abundance, where, oh, opportunities will multiply for me and all my people. We all gonna eat. We're all gonna shine. We're all gonna do amazing things. Would be the way that I would hold confidence, because when you're out here, it's not just you advocating for yourself. You have a whole community advocating for you. My name is being spoken in spaces I've never walked through. My reputation's coming into places that I was never been, and it's being carried there by people who I'm speaking their names in spaces and I'm elevating their work and identity on a global platform. And it's not done with the intention of a reciprocal thing. It's just knowing that us being in this world vibrates. Like we vibrate, we create ripples in the world that changes people. And we just want to make sure that those impacted by our presence is walking away feeling more loved, more joy, more supported, more seen, and more respected.
That was really good advice. I feel like it made me understand how one person can have an effect on the greater whole. So, to wrap up the episode, can you tell us what some of your future plans and future goals are?
Sure. I'm continuing to grow my community. So I always like to encourage people to follow me on IG, which is at Pascal Sablan, my name. So if you're not following me, please support there. Part of my goals is also making Greatness a New York Times bestseller. So continuing to do community events and push the book wherever and however I can. I've also committed to donating 500 copies to elementary and high school kids. And so, really making sure that I'm engaging people all over the world and being able to distribute those books and plant those seeds of design and architecture in young minds and talents across the world. Continuing to lead a practice in a way that's aligned with my values and what I've been kind of demanding from the profession for my entire career, and being able to stand those up in the office and see proof of concept of if it's working and how we can do better in that space. So these are all kind of like my future goals of just making sure that I continue to grow, be in spaces that allows me to pull more of us into those spaces too, and to stay safe and to make my son feel prioritized, loved, and protected.
I'm excited for what you have in the future. I still follow you, so I know I'll be like looking forward to see where your path goes. And I'm excited for everything with your book and your family. So good luck with everything. And thank you for taking your time to be on this podcast. It was great having this conversation with you. And I hope maybe we'll see each other maybe at a NOMA conference and we could come and say hello.
Yes, please. The
Thank
NOMA
you.
conference is in Kansas City this year, October 8th to the 12th. So I hope people are inspired to come be there with us. Thank you so much for the amazing opportunity.
I want to thank everyone for listening. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform. You can follow us on Instagram at Beyond the Surface _design pod. I want to thank our producer Caleb Clogg and the Beyond the Surface team for making this podcast possible. Thank you for listening to this episode of Beyond the Surface featuring Pascale Sablan. Until next time, goodbye.